My husband and his business partners abandoned me in Dubai with no money, passport, or way home after I discovered their illegal activities. Let's see how the little housewife survives now. Michael laughed as security escorted me from the hotel. 6 months later, he froze when he saw me sitting behind his desk in New York. "The company is mine now," I told him. "So is your apartment. You should have checked who really owned your family's business before you left me to drown." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert heat hit like a physical wall as the hotel's glass doors closed behind me. Security stood watch, impassive in their dark suits despite the 110-degree temperature, making sure I couldn't re-enter. Around me, Dubai's ultra-modern skyline shimmered like a mirage, the Burj Khalifa piercing the cloudless sky, a monument to wealth and power that now seemed to mock my predicament. My silk blouse already clung to my skin, my designer heels suddenly impractical on the scorching pavement. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just hours earlier, I'd been Anya Blackwood, respected wife of tech security magnate Michael Blackwood, attending a luxury business retreat. Now I was effectively homeless, penniless, and alone in a foreign country. "Ma'am, you need to leave the property," the larger security guard said, his accent thick but his meaning clear. His hand hovered near his earpiece, ready to call for backup if I created a scene. "My husband has my passport, my wallet, everything," I said, hating how my voice trembled. "I need to speak with him. Mr. Blackwood has checked out and left instructions that you are not to be admitted or assisted." The guard's expression remained professional, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity, perhaps, or maybe judgment. Either way, it burned worse than the sun overhead. 2 hours earlier, I'd accidentally opened the wrong laptop in our suite. Michael's instead of mine, the identical MacBooks easily confused. What I found were financial records revealing a complex money laundering operation through Blackwood Security Technologies' international contracts. When Michael caught me scrolling through the files, his handsome face had transformed into something unrecognizable. "You stupid nosy bitch," he'd hissed, voice deadly quiet as he snatched the laptop. "You have no idea what you've done." Everything happened with terrifying speed after that. A hushed phone call. His business partners, Alvin and Carter, arriving at our suite, faces grim. A whispered conference in the bathroom while I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, still in shock from what I'd discovered, and Michael's reaction. When they emerged, Michael's smile had returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Honey, we need to go downstairs for an emergency meeting. Bring your purse." Foolishly, I'd complied, relief washing over me that he seemed calmer. In the elevator, surrounded by his partners, no one spoke. The silence should have warned me, but after 10 years of marriage, I still trusted him implicitly. The meeting was at the front desk, where Michael informed me that I wouldn't be joining them for the remainder of the trip. When I protested, he leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "If you say one word about what you saw, I'll make sure you disappear in this country. Nobody would ever find you." He pressed a $100 bill into my palm. "Consider this generous given the circumstances. Let's see how the little housewife survives now." Then security appeared, summoned by Alvin, and escorted me outside while Michael and his partners departed through another exit, taking everything I had with them: credit cards, phone, passport, even my reading glasses. The $100 would hardly cover a night in even the cheapest Dubai hotel. Now, standing on the blistering sidewalk, I realized just how vulnerable I truly was. In 10 years of marriage, I'd never imagined Michael capable of such betrayal. I'd given up my own promising career in financial analysis to support his dreams, becoming the perfect corporate wife, hosting his business dinners, accompanying him to retreats like this one, making myself indispensable as the charming, intelligent partner who helped secure deals through careful conversation and observation. I'd made myself indispensable. Except, apparently, I wasn't a taxi. Slowed, the driver eyeing me hopefully. I clutched Michael's $100 bill, my only resource in a city built on extravagance. My thoughts raced. The American consulate would be my first stop, but what then? Michael controlled all our accounts. My name wasn't even on most of them, a tax strategy he'd insisted on years ago that I'd never questioned. But as I raised my hand to hail the taxi, an odd calm settled over me. For the first time since opening that laptop, my financial analyst's mind began to work clearly. I remembered something, a detail from years ago that Michael might have forgotten in his rage. Before our marriage, when Blackwood Security was just starting, I'd helped structure the original incorporation. As a wedding gift, Michael's father had secretly included my name on the founding documents, a gesture of welcome to the family that Michael had dismissed as sentimental nonsense. Sentiment has no place in business, he'd told his father, but the paperwork had been filed anyway. If those documents still stood, if no one had changed them in the intervening decade when I'd stepped back from any official role, a plan began to form. Intricate, difficult, but possible. I'd need allies, resources, and time. Most of all, I'd need Michael to believe he'd won, to become complacent while I worked in silence. "American consulate, please," I told the taxi driver, my voice steadier now. As Dubai's glass towers receded, in the window, I caught my reflection, tear-streaked, disheveled, but with something new in my eyes. The perfect corporate wife had vanished, abandoned on that scorching sidewalk. In her place was someone Michael wouldn't recognize when they eventually met again. Someone who remembered every business confidence shared across pillows, every password, carelessly spoken aloud, every weakness revealed during a decade of intimacy. Someone who knew exactly where to look and who to call. Someone dangerous. I was going to take everything from him. But first, I needed to survive. Michael hadn't always been cruel. That was the thought that kept circling as I sat in the sterile waiting area of the American consulate, clutching a paper cup of water provided by a sympathetic receptionist. 10 years earlier, Michael Blackwood had been the rising star of the cybersecurity world, brilliant, ambitious, and surprisingly gentle in private. We'd met at a financial tech conference where I was representing my investment firm. I'd challenged one of his assertions during his presentation, and instead of dismissing me like most male entrepreneurs would have, he'd invited me to continue the debate over coffee. "You're the sharpest person in that room," he'd said, eyes alight with genuine admiration. Including me. Our courtship moved quickly, intellectual sparring that turned to respect that ignited into passion. At 26, I had been making my own mark in financial analysis, particularly in identifying vulnerabilities in corporate structures. My colleagues had warned me about giving up my career trajectory when Michael proposed just 8 months after we'd met. "You're making a mistake. Anya," my mentor Penelope had cautioned, "I've seen too many brilliant women disappear into their husbands' shadows." But Michael had promised it would be different for us. "We'll be partners in everything," he'd insisted, showing me the business plan for Blackwood Security. "Your financial expertise, my security innovations. We'll build something extraordinary together." For the first 2 years, that promise held. I helped structure the company, worked alongside him in their modest first office, and provided crucial analysis that helped secure their initial major contracts. Michael's father, Stuart Blackwood, had provided the seed funding and connections from his decades in traditional security services. The old man had taken an immediate liking to me. "You remind me of my late wife," Stuart had confided during our wedding reception. Sharp as a tack and not afraid to speak her mind. Michael needs that. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The change came gradually after Stuart's unexpected death 3 years into our marriage. As Blackwood Security expanded internationally, Michael began excluding me from meetings, citing client confidentiality concerns. My role shifted from strategic partner to corporate wife, planning events, maintaining our growing social network, and creating the perfect home environment where Michael could focus on scaling the business. The Tribeca apartment had been our first extravagance, a penthouse with panoramic views of the Hudson River. I'd thrown myself into decorating it, telling myself this was still contributing to our shared vision. "The Carrington contract hinged on that dinner you hosted," Michael would say, validating my new role. "You have a gift for making people comfortable enough to sign on the dotted line." I'd accepted these crumbs of acknowledgement, ignoring how he increasingly controlled our finances, removing my access to company information to protect me from liability concerns. I'd surrendered my financial independence so gradually I hardly noticed its disappearance. The Dubai trip was supposed to be a celebration of Blackwood Security's expansion into Middle Eastern markets. 10 years of building had made Michael wealthy and respected, his company now employing over 200 people with offices in 8 countries. I'd been excited to see Dubai, spending weeks researching local business customs to ensure I'd represent the company appropriately. Michael had even seemed pleased by my preparation, reviewing my notes on the flight over. "This is why you're invaluable," he'd said, squeezing my hand as our private car had approached the gleaming Burj Al Arab where we'd be staying. "You think of everything except the possibility that my husband was using his legitimate business as cover for money laundering. Everything except that he might abandon me in a foreign country when I discovered the truth. Mrs. Blackwood?" The consular officer's voice pulled me from my memories. "We've located your emergency contact information in our system. Would you like us to contact your sister in Boston?" Trixie, my younger sister who had never trusted Michael, who had maintained our close relationship despite his subtle attempts to isolate me from my family. The sister who had insisted I register with the State Department's emergency contact system before this trip, just in case. "Yes," I whispered, relief flooding through me. "Please contact her immediately." While the consular staff worked on emergency replacement documents, I used their phone to call Trixie directly. He did, "What?" My sister's outrage burned through the international line. "That absolute monster. I'm booking a flight right now." "No," I said firmly. "I need you in New York, not here." "Anya, you're stranded in Dubai. You need help." "I do need help, but not the kind you think." I lowered my voice, conscious of others nearby. "I need you to go to the storage unit in Manhattan. Remember the file boxes I kept from when I helped start the company? Don't tell anyone what you're doing, not even your husband." "What are you planning?" Trixie's voice had changed, recognizing something in my tone. "Justice," I answered simply, "and I'll need every document from the original incorporation." Michael made a mistake today, but it wasn't leaving me behind. It was reminding me who I used to be. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window. My designer outfit now looked rumpled and out of place, but my eyes held a clarity I hadn't seen in years. The perfect corporate wife was gone. The financial analyst who specialized in identifying vulnerabilities had returned. The consular officer approached with forms for my emergency passport. "We can arrange a loan for your return flight to the United States, Mrs. Blackwood. You'll just need to sign here." I took the pen, hesitating only briefly before signing. Not as Anya Blackwood, but as Anya Reeves Blackwood, my full legal name that included my maiden name, the name that appeared on Blackwood Security's original incorporation documents. The name Michael had spent years training me to forget. The first hint that something was wrong with Blackwood Security came 6 months before Dubai, at the company's annual holiday gala. I had orchestrated the event as always, a sophisticated affair at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with carefully curated guests and impeccable details designed to impress potential clients and reward loyal ones. Michael had been unusually tense. In the weeks leading up to the event, disappearing into his home office for late-night calls he claimed were with the Singapore team. When I'd bring him coffee, conversations would abruptly halt. Once, I caught him hurriedly closing spreadsheets that looked nothing like the company's usual financial documents. Just exploring some alternative investment structures, he'd explained, kissing my forehead dismissively. Nothing you need to, worry about. At the gala, I was making my usual rounds when I overheard Carter Lowell, Michael's head of international operations, in a heated whisper with Alvin Mercer, the company's legal counsel. "The Dubai operation has to go perfectly," Carter muttered. "The sheikh is getting nervous about the Cayman transfers." "Keep your voice down," Alvin hissed, eyes darting around the room before landing on me. His expression shifted instantly to an artificial smile. "Anya, magnificent event as always." When I mentioned the exchange to Michael later that night, his reaction was disproportionate, a flash of anger quickly masked by forced casualness. "You misheard," he insisted, loosening his tie with deliberate calm. "And you shouldn't eavesdrop on business conversations you don't understand." "I understand international banking regulations quite well," I reminded him, feeling a flicker of my old professional pride. "If the company is using Cayman accounts, I could help ensure everything's structured properly." Michael's laugh held an edge I'd never heard before. "Stick to planning parties, Anya. It's what you're good at now." That night marked the first time I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. As Michael slept beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, remembering the brilliant financial analyst I'd once been, the woman who had specialized in identifying suspicious patterns in corporate structures. The warning signs continued accumulating. Michael began traveling more frequently, often with little notice. Our joint credit card statements showed large cash withdrawals in various international locations. When I questioned a $25,000 withdrawal, in Singapore, Michael created a new credit card account that I couldn't access. "It simplifies the company reimbursements," he explained. "The accountants suggested it." I found myself increasingly isolated. Michael discouraged my lunches with former colleagues claiming they only wanted inside information about Blackwood. He suggested my sister Trixie was jealous of our success when I planned visits with her. Even our social circle narrowed to only those couples directly beneficial to Michael's business. One evening, while searching for a missing earring in Michael's closet, I found a passport I didn't recognize. The photo was Michael, but the name read Mitchell Blackwell, a variation he'd never mentioned. When confronted, he claimed it was for an intelligence contract with a government agency that required operational security. "This is classified, Anya," he said sharply. "I shouldn't have even told you that much. Don't mention it again." I didn't, but I did begin paying closer attention. The Michael I'd married, brilliant but ethical, ambitious but principled, seemed to be disappearing behind a facade I couldn't penetrate. The man who had once valued my intelligence now seemed threatened by it. 2 months before Dubai, I received a strange call from Stuart's old friend, a retired banker named Harold Jenkins. "I've been trying to reach you privately for weeks," he said, his voice tense. "Something's not right with the company accounts I'm still connected to. There are patterns that don't make sense. Large sums moving through multiple countries within hours. It has all the markers of money laundering," I finished automatically, my analyst's mind immediately recognizing what he was describing. "Precisely. I've tried discussing it with Michael, but he's shut me out completely. Claimed I'm becoming senile." Harold's voice cracked with indignation. Stuart would never have permitted this. He built that company on integrity. After the call, I sat in our empty penthouse, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the possibility that my husband was involved in something illegal. The thought was physically painful, like acknowledging a fatal diagnosis. Instead of confronting Michael directly, I began subtle research. I renewed connections with former financial colleagues under the guise of social catch-ups. I paid more attention to the business news about regions where Blackwood operated. I noticed patterns myself: contracts with companies that seemed to exist only on paper, partnerships with businesses owned by individuals with questionable reputations. When Michael announced I would be joining him for the Dubai retreat, I was surprised but cautiously hopeful. Perhaps he wanted to reconnect, to rebuild the partnership we'd once had. I prepared meticulously, telling myself this could be an opportunity to understand what was really happening with the company. I'm looking forward to being more involved. Again, I told him as we packed. Like the early days. Something flickered across his face. Was it guilt? Fear? But his smile returned quickly. Of course, he said smoothly. This is an important trip for Blackwood's future. Our future. I realize now he never intended for me to come home from Dubai. The invitation wasn't an olive branch, it was a calculated risk. Taking me to a country with strict laws, limited diplomatic protections for Americans, and where Blackwood had powerful connections. A perfect place to dispose of a liability. I just never expected that liability would be me. The morning of my discovery began ordinarily enough. Michael had left our hotel suite early for what he called a preliminary meeting with potential clients. I'd taken advantage of the quiet to catch up on emails and organize my notes for the evening's dinner, where I was expected to charm the wives of Michael's business associates. Our suite at the Burj Al Arab was opulent to the point of absurdity, a two-story affair with marble floors, a private elevator, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Dubai's impossible skyline rising from the desert. The extravagance no longer impressed me as it once had. These days, luxury felt less like an achievement and more like a gilded cage. I'd settled at the glass desk overlooking the Persian Gulf, reaching for my laptop to review my research on Emirati business customs. Two identical MacBooks sat side by side, mine and Michael's. Without thinking, I grabbed the one on the left and opened it. The screen lit up without requesting a password, which should have been my first clue something was wrong. Michael was obsessive about security, a necessary paranoia in his line of work, he always claimed. I realized my mistake immediately, but was about to close it when a notification popped up. Transfer to Cayman account KBH7 complete, 4.2 Nemers. My fingers froze above the keyboard. The amount was staggering, but it was the account naming convention that truly chilled me. KBH7. I recognized the pattern from my financial analysis days. It stood for Core Bacher Holdings, a shell company structure I'd once helped identify in a money laundering investigation during my early career. Instead of closing the laptop, I clicked the notification. A spreadsheet opened, displaying a complex web of transfers flowing through at least 12 countries. The pattern was unmistakable to someone with my background. Large sums being broken down into smaller transfers, moved through multiple jurisdictions, consolidated again, and ultimately emerging as seemingly legitimate business payments. Classic. Money laundering, executed with sophisticated precision. My hands trembled as I scrolled further, uncovering details that painted a devastating picture. Blackwood Securities' legitimate contracts with governments and corporations served as perfect covers for moving illicit funds. Some client names I recognized from news reports about corruption investigations. Others were known fronts for criminal organizations. This wasn't a minor ethical lapse or tax avoidance scheme. This was organized crime on a global scale. What the hell are you doing? Michael's voice from the doorway sent ice through my veins. I hadn't heard him return. When I looked up, the husband I thought I knew was unrecognizable. His handsome face contorted with cold fury, body rigid with contained violence. Michael, what is this? I gestured at the screen, still hoping against hope for an explanation. That would make sense. That would restore the man I'd married. These transfers… Shut the laptop now. His voice was deadly quiet. When I didn't move fast enough, he crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed the computer shut, nearly catching my fingers. You have no idea what you've done. What I've… done? Disbelief gave me courage. What about what you've done? This is money laundering, Michael, on a massive scale. He grabbed my wrist, fingers digging in painfully. This isn't your concern. It never was. You gave up the right to question my business decisions when you decided you'd rather be a corporate wife than a real partner. That wasn't my decision. You pushed me out. Because you couldn't handle what building a real empire requires. His voice rose, then he caught himself, releasing my wrist and stepping back. With visible effort, he composed himself, straightening his bespoke suit jacket. It doesn't matter now, he said, voice eerily calm as he pulled out his phone. You've complicated things, but it's manageable. I watched in stunned silence as he sent a text. Within minutes, Alvin and Carter arrived at our suite, faces grim. Michael ushered them into the bathroom, closing the door for a whispered conference that left me sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing my bruised wrist and trying to process the collapse of everything I'd believed about my life. When they emerged, all 3 men wore neutral expressions. Michael approached with the smile I'd once found charming. Now it seemed like the grin of a predator. There's been a change of plans, he said smoothly. The team needs to handle some regulatory concerns. We'll be moving to another hotel while we sort it out. He handed me my purse. Bring only what you need for a meeting. We'll come back for the rest. Relief washed over me. He wasn't going to hurt me, just damage control. Still dazed, I followed them to the elevator, surrounded by Michael and his partners. Nobody spoke during the descent. I focused on breathing, on planning what to say to make Michael understand the danger he was in. Surely we could fix this together, find a legal exit strategy. The elevator opened directly into the hotel's opulent lobby. Michael guided me toward the front desk with his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that once felt protective but now seemed controlling. Mrs. Blackwood won't be continuing her stay with us, he informed the concierge with practiced charm. Urgent family matter back home. The concierge looked to me for confirmation. For a moment, I considered screaming, causing a scene. But what, would I say? That my husband was involved in financial crimes? In a country where I had no support system, where Blackwood Security had powerful connections? I nodded mutely. Such a shame to cut your trip short, the concierge said sympathetically. That's when Michael leaned close, his lips brushing my ear in what would look like an affectionate gesture to observers. If you say one word about what you saw, I'll make sure you disappear in this country. Nobody would ever find you. He pressed something into my palm, $100 bill. Consider this generous given the circumstances. His voice dropped lower, vicious now. Let's see how the little housewife survives now. Before I could respond, 2 security officers appeared beside us. Alvin must have arranged it while Michael distracted me. This woman is no longer a guest, Michael informed them coldly. Please escort her out. She's not to return to the property. The last thing I saw as the guards led me toward the door was Michael and his partners, walking briskly toward another exit, Carter carrying my passport and phone that had been in my purse just moments before. The hotel doors sealed shut behind. Me with pneumatic efficiency, cutting off the artificial cool of the lobby and throwing me into Dubai's merciless afternoon heat. Just like that, I was alone, stranded in a foreign country with nothing but $100 and the clothes on my back. 10 years of marriage had ended in less than 10 minutes. The desert heat pressed against me like a physical weight as I stood frozen outside the Burj Al Arab. Sweat beaded along my hairline, trickling down my neck and soaking into the silk blouse I'd carefully selected that morning. A lifetime ago, when I was still Anya Blackwood, respected wife of a successful entrepreneur. Now I was What? Abandoned. Stranded. A woman with no identity documents, no access to funds, and no way home. For several minutes, I simply couldn't move. Shock had rendered my thoughts sluggish, my body leaden. Tourists streamed around me, casting curious glances at the well-dressed woman standing motionless in the blistering sun. A concerned bellhop approached, asking if I needed assistance. When I didn't respond, he frowned and returned to his post, clearly deciding I wasn't his problem. He was right. I was no one's problem but my own. The $100 bill burned in. My palm, Michael's final insult. A pittance that wouldn't cover half a night in even the cheapest Dubai hotel. A sum that said clearly, "You are worth nothing to me." Eventually, basic survival instincts broke through my paralysis. I needed shade, water, and a plan. Clutching my meager funds, I walked toward a line of taxis idling in the circular drive, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Each step felt like a personal victory against the crushing weight of betrayal. "American Consulate," I told the first driver, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. As the taxi pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of the Burj, Al Arab in the side mirror, a monument to wealth and privilege that had briefly been mine, but had never truly belonged to me. Much like my marriage, it had been an illusion of security built on unstable foundations. The taxi driver attempted conversation, but I couldn't focus on his words. My mind replayed the moment of discovery in an endless loop. The spreadsheet, Michael's face transforming from the husband I thought I knew into a stranger, the cold calculation in his eyes as he abandoned me. I found myself obsessively cataloging the contents of my purse before it had been taken. Passport, wallet with all my credit cards, smartphone, even my prescription sunglasses. Michael had left me nothing except the $100. No, not nothing. He'd left me with knowledge. Dangerous knowledge. The American Consulate was a modernist building surrounded by security barriers. Inside, the air conditioning was a shock after the outdoor furnace. I approached the reception desk, struggling to articulate my situation through increasingly ragged breaths. "My husband abandoned me, took my passport. I need help." The words sounded pathetic, melodramatic, the kind of hysterical female scenario Michael would mock. But the consular staff had seen similar situations before, not uncommon in a region where wealth and power operated by different rules than in America. "Please complete this form, Mrs. Blackwood," a sympathetic officer named Amber said, leading me to a private room with a glass of water. "We'll need to verify your identity before we can issue emergency travel documents." Identity? The word echoed in my head as I stared at the form. Who was I now? Not the financial analyst with a promising career. Not the polished corporate wife who excelled at making powerful men feel important. Those identities had been stripped away, leaving... "What? Do you have anyone we can contact in the United States?" Amber asked gently. "My sister," I whispered, feeling the first genuine relief since this nightmare began. "Trixie Reeves. She's my emergency contact." While the consulate staff worked their bureaucratic magic, the shock began morphing into something else. A cold, clarifying anger that settled in my chest. Michael hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd betrayed everything I thought we stood for. The company we'd built together was a criminal enterprise. The wealth we'd accumulated was tainted. The life I'd lived was a carefully constructed lie. When the consulate phone was offered, I called Trixie directly. Her familiar voice unleashing the tears I'd been holding back. "He did what?" Her outrage burned through the international line. "That absolute monster. I'm booking a flight right now." "No," I said, suddenly certain. "I need you in New York, not here." "Anya, you're stranded in Dubai. You need help." "I do need help, but not the kind you think." I lowered my voice. "I need you to go to the storage unit in Manhattan. Remember the file boxes I kept from when I helped start the company? Don't tell anyone what you're doing. Not even your husband. What are you planning? Trixie asked, hearing something new in my voice. Justice, I answered simply. After arranging for the emergency travel documents, I faced my next challenge: accommodation for the night. The consulate provided a list of modestly priced hotels, but even these would quickly exhaust my $100. I needed more resources. In the consulate restroom, I assessed my assets. My wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond in platinum, caught the fluorescent light. Michael had replaced my original modest ring with this ostentatious stone on our 5th anniversary, calling it an upgrade. I'd worn it proudly, seeing it as a symbol of our success. Now I recognized it for what it truly was, a gilded shackle marking me as property. I twisted it off my finger, feeling lighter with its absence. This would be my emergency fund, enough to secure lodging and food until I could arrange passage home. The watch, too, an anniversary gift that would fetch a decent price at the right pawn shop. That night, in a small but clean hotel room paid for with the proceeds from my pawned jewelry, I began constructing a new identity from the ashes of the old. The woman who emerged had Anya's face, but none of her naivete. This woman remembered every business confidence Michael had shared across pillows, every password carelessly spoken aloud, every vulnerability revealed during a decade of intimate access. This woman was dangerous precisely because she had been underestimated. As I drifted into exhausted sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Michael had made a catastrophic error. Not in betraying me, though that would prove costly enough, but in reminding me of who I had been before him. The financial analyst who specialized in uncovering corporate vulnerabilities. The woman who understood how power and money really worked. The woman who now had nothing left to lose. The emergency passport felt flimsy in my hands, nothing like the sturdy blue booklet Michael had taken. Yet this temporary document represented something profound. My first step toward reclaiming independence. Your flight to New York departs tomorrow evening, the consular officer explained, sliding a printout across the desk. The emergency loan covers economy class only. You'll need to repay it within 60 days of returning to the United States. I nodded, scanning the flight details. 24 hours until I could leave Dubai. 24 hours to decide what happened. Next, we've also prepared this police report documenting the theft of your belongings, she continued. This should help with insurance claims once you're home. Insurance claims, credit card cancellations, bank notifications, the mundane aftermath of catastrophe. I accepted the paperwork with a hollow feeling in my chest. These practical concerns felt disconnected from the real decision looming before me. What kind of life would I return to? Back in my modest hotel room, I spread the documents on the bed, creating a physical map of my options. The flight confirmation, the police report, the receipt from the pawn shop where I'd sold my wedding ring. Each paper represented a different path. I could go home and rebuild from zero. Find an apartment, reactivate my long-dormant career, file for divorce, and try to forget the last decade. The safe choice, the expected choice, or I could do something else entirely. My phone pinged with a message from Trixie on the temporary number I'd given her. Found the storage boxes. Everything's here. Incorporation documents, original contracts, even Dad's old laptop with your financial models. What exactly am I looking for? My fingers hovered over the keypad. This was the moment of decision. Could tell her to leave everything where it was. To forget this wild idea taking shape in my mind. To help me find an apartment and a job interview instead. Or I could become the woman Michael never expected. The one who wouldn't just survive his betrayal, but make him regret it with every fiber of his being. Look for the original incorporation papers, I typed. The ones Stewart insisted on filing. Before the wedding. The ones listing me as co-founder with 30% ownership. Trixie's response came quickly. Found them. Holy shit, Anya. These were never superseded by later filings. According to this, you still own nearly a third of Blackwood security. A strange calm settled over me as the pieces aligned. Stuart Blackwood had insisted I be included in the original corporate structure, a wedding gift Michael had dismissed as sentimental nonsense but never formally changed. After Stuart's death, Michael had simply removed me from operations, counting on my trust and lack of interest in the legal details. There's more, Trixie wrote. Stuart's personal holding company still controls 25% of Blackwood shares. The executor is someone named Harold Jenkins. Harold, Stuart's old friend who had tried to warn me about the suspicious financial activities. The man Michael had dismissed as senile when he raised concerns. Together, Harold's managed shares and my ownership would constitute controlling interest in Blackwood security. My hands trembled as I dialed Harold's number from memory. Anya? His voice was cautious. Is everything all right? You're calling from an unknown number. No, Harold. Everything is not all right, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Michael abandoned me in Dubai after I discovered evidence of money laundering through company accounts. Silence stretched across the line. Then, I've been worried something like this might happen. The patterns I've been seeing, they're systematic, deliberate. How long do you think it's been going on? Since Stuart died, I suspect. Michael was brilliant but always impatient. Stuart kept him ethical. After he passed, Harold sighed heavily. I should have pushed harder, asked more questions. It's not your fault, I assured him. But I need your help now. According to the original incorporation documents, I still own 30% of Blackwood. And you control Stuart's shares as executor, correct? Yes, until the terms of his long-term trust mature. Another 5 years. Harold paused. What are you suggesting, Anya? I'm suggesting we save the company Stuart built, clean out the corruption, remove Michael and anyone else involved in illegal activities. That's extraordinary and dangerous. These operations involving international money movement, they don't happen without powerful, dangerous partners. I know. I thought of Michael's threat in Dubai, the cold calculation in his eyes. But I also know the alternative is watching. Stuart's legacy become nothing more than a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Harold was silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. What do you need from me? He finally asked. The question crystallized everything. There would be no going back from this moment. No returning to the comfortable, ignorant life I'd led before. This choice would define everything that followed. I need you to call an emergency board meeting. As Stuart's executor, you have that right. Schedule it for 1 week from today. Michael will fight this. Let him. The steel in my voice surprised even me. Also, I need access to funds. Enough to get back on my feet and prepare. Michael controls all our joint accounts. I can arrange a loan against your shares. It will take a few days to process. I need it sooner, tomorrow if possible. I need to make some acquisitions before returning to New York. Acquisitions? I thought of Michael's apartment, the penthouse he'd insisted we buy in his name alone for tax purposes. The place where he'd kissed me goodbye before our Dubai trip, knowing he planned to abandon me halfway across the world. Evidence, I said simply, and leverage. After ending the call, I stepped onto the small balcony of my hotel room. The Dubai skyline glittered against the night, spectacular and alien. 24 hours ago, this view had represented everything I'd achieved as Michael Blackwood's wife, access to a world of luxury and privilege few ever experienced. Now I saw it differently. Not as the pinnacle of success, but as the perfect symbol of illusion. Gleaming towers rising improbably from barren sand. Spectacular from a distance, but built by exploited labor, fueled by money of questionable origin, designed to impress rather than endure. Just like my marriage. I returned inside and reached for the hotel stationery. In careful handwriting, I began listing the steps needed for what came next. Not a plan for survival, a strategy for resurrection. By morning, I had filled 3 pages with notes, names of board members who might support me, financial institutions that had processed suspicious transactions, clients whose contracts seemed legitimate versus those that appeared to be shells, a detailed timeline for my return to New York. When Harold's wire transfer arrived the following afternoon, a sum modest by Blackwood standards, but more than enough for my immediate needs, I made one final decision. Instead of boarding my flight back to New York, I changed my destination. Singapore first, where Blackwood kept its Asian headquarters and where I knew certain backup servers were maintained. Then Geneva, where the banking connections would yield documentation I couldn't access otherwise. Michael expected me to run home defeated, if he thought of me at all. Instead, I would arrive back in New York only when I was ready, armed with everything needed to take back what was rightfully mine, and more. The safe choice would have been returning immediately to lick my wounds and start over. I chose war instead. Singapore hit me with a wall of humidity as I exited Changi Airport. The contrast with Dubai's dry heat was jarring, like moving between different planets in the span of a 14-hour flight. I took a deep breath of the tropical air, laden with unfamiliar scents, fragrant street food, exhaust from passing taxis, the subtle sweetness of orchids that seemed to bloom everywhere in this meticulously maintained city-state. I'd been to Singapore once before, accompanying Michael to a cybersecurity conference 3 years earlier. Then, I'd experienced the city through the protective bubble of luxury, 5-star hotels, private drivers, exclusive restaurants. Now I stood alone on the curb, watching travelers being greeted by loved ones while I held nothing but a small duffel bag purchased at Dubai Airport containing a change of clothes and the few toiletries I could afford. My temporary passport earned a raised eyebrow from the immigration officer, but Harold's wire transfer gave me enough financial cushion to book a modest hotel in the Geylang district, far from the gleaming financial center where Blackwood's Singapore office occupied 3 floors of a skyscraper. "First time in Singapore?" the hotel clerk asked as I checked in. "No," I replied, "but it feels like it." My room was clean but Spartan, a twin bed, a small desk, and a bathroom where the shower sprayed directly over the toilet. A far cry from the luxury I'd grown accustomed to, but it offered something more valuable than comfort: anonymity. I'd chosen Singapore deliberately. During Blackwood's expansion into Asian markets, Michael had boasted about their data redundancy systems, backup, servers maintained independently from their U.S. infrastructure. Even if headquarters burned to the ground, he'd told investors, we wouldn't lose a byte of client data. What Michael didn't know was how carefully I'd listened during those technical briefings, how I'd memorized the names of system administrators, the locations of server facilities, the protocols for emergency access. Information absorbed during years of being the attentive corporate wife, present but presumed irrelevant. After a brief rest, I ventured out into the humid evening. Singapore's efficient public transportation system was a blessing. The MRT train delivered me within 2 blocks of my first target, a nondescript office building in the Jurong district, housing one of Blackwood's discrete data centers. I studied the building from a coffee shop across the street, planning my approach. Security would be tight, but focused on cyber threats, not physical ones. No one would expect the founder's wife to appear unannounced halfway around the world. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I'd spent the remains of my Dubai pawnshop money on appropriate attire. A conservative business suit and modest heels that transformed me back into Anya Blackwood, corporate wife. My hair was pulled into a tight chignon, makeup carefully applied, to project confidence and authority. At precisely 9:15 a.m., I walked through the lobby of the building, nodding confidently to security as if I belonged. The Blackwood offices occupied the 12th floor, accessed by security-keyed elevators. I approached the front desk with practiced charm. "Good morning. Anya Blackwood to see Chester Wong, please." The receptionist looked startled. "Mrs. Blackwood? We weren't expecting you. It's an unscheduled visit. Michael wanted me to personally deliver some documents while I'm in Singapore for a charity event." I smiled apologetically. I should have called ahead, but with the time difference. "Is Chester available?" Chester Wong was the regional IT director, a brilliant systems architect who had always treated me with genuine respect during company events. More importantly, he'd been hired during my active involvement with the company and owed his rapid promotion partly to my recommendation. 5 minutes later, Chester emerged into the reception area, surprise evident on his face. "Mrs. Blackwood, what an unexpected pleasure." "Chester, how many times must I ask you to call me Anya?" I embraced him warmly, maintaining the fiction that this was a routine visit. "Do you have a moment? I need your expertise on something Michael is concerned about." In his private office, the facade dropped. Chester's expression grew concerned as he noticed my lack of staff, security, or the usual trappings of the founders. "Wife, is everything all right, Mrs. Anya?" I made a split-second decision. Partial honesty might serve better than complete deception. "No, Chester, everything is not all right. I need access to the Singapore backup servers, and I need your absolute discretion." His eyes widened. "That would require authorization from Michael or from a company owner." I finished for him. "I am both Michael's wife and a 30% owner of Blackwood Security according to the original incorporation documents." I slid across a digital copy of the ownership papers Trixie had located. Chester studied them carefully, his IT-trained mind processing the implications. "There are irregularities in some of the company's international transactions," I continued, watching his reaction closely. "Nothing that would compromise our client's security. Michael would never risk that. But concerning enough that I'm conducting a private audit before involving outside authorities." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was indeed conducting an audit of sorts. Chester's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders. He knew something wasn't right with Blackwood's operations. Whether he knew the full extent of the money laundering, I couldn't tell. "The system will log any access," he said finally. "I can't override that." "I don't need you to. In fact, I want the access logged properly under my credentials." After a moment's consideration, Chester nodded. "I'll need to verify your identity through the system. Standard protocol." The next hour was a tense exercise in technical authentication. Chester was thorough, professional, and just paranoid enough to be good at his job. When the final verification cleared, he moved to a specialized workstation. "You'll have 6 hours of access to the archive systems. After that, the temporary credentials expire, and the system will automatically flag unusual access patterns to senior management." 6 hours to find evidence of Michael's criminal operation within terabytes of corporate data. It would have been impossible for someone without my background. But I hadn't just been a corporate wife these past 10 years. I'd been an observer, absorbing the patterns and structures of Blackwood's operations, waiting for a purpose I hadn't realized would come. "Thank you, Chester. I won't forget this." He gave me a long look. "Whatever you find, Blackwood employs good people here, people with families, responsibilities." "I know. This isn't about destroying the company. It's about saving it." As Chester left me alone with the system, I felt a weight settle onto my shoulders. I was crossing a threshold into unknown territory, not just accessing corporate data without Michael's knowledge, but committing to a path that would forever change the trajectory of my life. The familiar Blackwood interface glowed on the screen before me. Somewhere within those encrypted files lay the evidence I needed: proof of Michael's crimes, documentation of the money flows, identification of his accomplices. With it, I could either destroy him or force a reckoning that might save the company Stewart had built. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. This was my last chance to turn back, to choose the simpler path of divorce and walking away. The path of least resistance. Instead, I began to type. 6 hours later, I left the Blackwood offices with an encrypted drive containing everything I needed from the Singapore servers. Chester had maintained professional distance during my visit, but as I departed, he pressed a business card into my hand. "My personal number," he murmured. "If you need technical assistance, that won't be logged in company systems." I'd underestimated him. Chester hadn't just given me access. He'd made a choice to side with me over Michael. A small victory, but significant. The first ally in what would become a carefully assembled coalition. Back in my modest hotel room, I reviewed what I'd discovered. The evidence was more damning than I'd anticipated. Elaborate schemes moving money through a dozen jurisdictions, fake contracts with shell companies, systematically falsified financial reports. Most disturbingly, correspondence that implicated not just Michael, but Alvin and Carter, along with 3 other executives I'd considered friends. The company I'd helped build had been corrupted to its core. Saving it would require excising the infection entirely. That night, I booked a flight to Geneva. Singapore had given me the documentation I needed. Switzerland would provide the banking connections and legal strategy required for what came next. With each step into this unfamiliar world of corporate espionage and financial investigation, I felt less like Michael Blackwood's abandoned wife, and more like someone new emerging from that chrysalis, someone stronger, more dangerous, and utterly committed to justice. Someone Michael would soon wish he'd never betrayed. Geneva embraced me with old-world elegance, a stark contrast to Singapore's humid modernity and Dubai's ostentatious wealth. The city carried itself with quiet confidence, its money and power flowing discreetly behind centuries-old facades and the understated discipline of Swiss precision. I checked into a small pension in the Saint-Gervais district, far from the luxury, hotels where Michael and I had stayed during previous visits. The elderly proprietress, Madame Beaufort, raised an eyebrow at my minimal luggage but asked no questions when I paid for a week in advance from Harold's wire transfer. "The room has a desk if you are here for business," she informed me in accented English, handing over a heavy brass key. "And very fast internet. All my guests require it now." The room was Spartan but immaculate. Polished wood floors, crisp, white linens, and tall windows overlooking a narrow cobblestone street. I set up my temporary workstation on the antique desk, connecting the encrypted drive from Singapore to my newly purchased laptop. Geneva represented the next crucial phase of my plan. While Singapore had provided the evidence of Michael's money laundering operations, Switzerland held the key to understanding how those operations connected to the legitimate global banking system. More importantly, it was home to Penelope Voscher, my former mentor from the financial analysis firm where I'd worked before marrying Michael. Penelope had left New York 5 years earlier to establish the European office of Halcyon Financial Intelligence, a firm specializing in anti-money laundering compliance. She'd invited me to join her team at the time, an opportunity I'd declined under pressure from Michael, who had insisted my place was by his side rather than building my own career overseas. "You don't need to work, Anya," he'd argued. "We have more money than we could spend in 3 lifetimes. I'd capitulated then, prioritizing marital harmony over professional fulfillment. The memory of that surrender now fueled my determination as I navigated Geneva's elegant streets toward Halcyon's offices near the Rue de Rhône. The receptionist's eyes widened when I gave my name. "Mrs. Blackwood, do you have an appointment?" "No," I admitted. "But please tell Ms. Voscher that Anya Reeves is here, her former analyst from New York." Minutes later, Penelope herself strode into the reception area, tall, imposing, and elegantly attired in a charcoal suit that radiated authority. Her silver-streaked hair was still cut in the same no-nonsense bob I remembered. At 62, she remained a formidable presence in the financial intelligence community. Her professional smile faltered when she registered my appearance. The modest off-the-rack clothes, the visible exhaustion, the lack of the polished luxury that had defined me as Michael Blackwood's wife. Anya? Concern replaced her corporate warmth. What's happened? I maintained composure until her office door closed behind us. Then, facing the woman who had once believed in my professional potential, I finally allowed my carefully constructed facade to crack. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie, I said simply, and I need your help to set it right. Over the next 2 hours, I laid out the situation with clinical precision. Michael's abandonment, the discovery of Blackwood's, money laundering operations, my evidence from Singapore, and my legal standing as an original company owner. Penelope listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively grimmer. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, fingers steepled beneath her chin in the characteristic pose I remembered from our analyst days. You understand what you're proposing, she said finally. Taking on your husband and his partners, exposing financial crimes that likely involve powerful clients, restructuring a major security company, all while they believe you're defeated and helpless. Yes. It's extraordinarily dangerous. These kinds of operations don't exist in isolation. There will be interests beyond Blackwood who very much want their financial channels to remain operational. I know the risks. Do you? Her gaze was penetrating. Michael abandoned you in Dubai with nothing. What do you imagine he'd do if he knew you were gathering evidence against him? The threat Michael had whispered in my ear at the hotel returned with chilling clarity. I'll make sure you disappear in this country. Nobody would ever find you. That's precisely why I need your help, I replied. Not just your expertise in financial intelligence, but your network, your protection. Penelope studied me for another long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, the same approving expression I remembered from my days as her protégé when I'd made a particularly insightful analysis. The quiet analyst I mentored has become something far more interesting. She pressed a button on her desk intercom. Claude, please clear my schedule for the remainder of the day. And contact Amber in Legal and Morris from Digital Forensics. We'll need the secure conference room for the afternoon. By evening, I had been introduced to Penelope's core team at Halcyon. Amber Rousseau, a formidable Swiss attorney specializing in financial crime. Maurice Diop, a Senegalese-French digital forensics expert. And Claude Bernier, Penelope's unflappable chief of operations. Together, we spread my Singapore evidence across the conference table, constructing a complex map of Blackwood's illicit operations. The structure is sophisticated, Maurice observed, manipulating the digital records I'd extracted. Multiple layers of shell companies, transfers timed to avoid regulatory flagging, documentation that appears legitimate under casual inspection. Michael was always brilliant, I acknowledged. Just not as brilliant as he thought. The weak point is here, Amber noted, indicating a series of transactions through a Liechtenstein foundation. They've been using the same pattern repeatedly. It creates a vulnerability. Can we use it to track the money flows backward? I asked. Better, Penelope interjected. We can use it to document the entire network, not just Blackwood's role, but everyone involved, clients, intermediaries, facilitators. That's not public information, I said cautiously. Gaining access would require resources that Halcyon has. Penelope completed my thought. We contract with regulatory bodies worldwide. Officially, we help banks comply with anti-money laundering regulations. Unofficially, we sometimes assist in building cases against significant financial crimes. Would you do that for me? Put company resources behind this? Penelope's expression turned serious. Not for you, Anya, for justice, and not without conditions. Name them. First, everything must be done legally. We document, we analyze, we prepare, but we don't hack, steal, or break laws. I nodded. Agreed. Second, you must be prepared to surrender all evidence to regulatory authorities when the time comes. No selective disclosure to protect anyone you might still have feelings for. I have no loyalty left for anyone involved in this, I assured her. Not even Michael. And third, Penelope concluded, you must promise me that when this is over, when you've reclaimed your company and your life, you will finally take the career path you abandoned. The financial intelligence community needs minds like yours, Anya. It always has. The third condition struck me unexpectedly. After a decade of having my professional abilities dismissed and diminished, Penelope's continued faith in my capabilities brought a lump to my throat. I promise, I said softly. Then consider Halcyon your ally. She extended her hand across the table, and we shook with the formality of a contract signing. We begin tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. As I walked back to my pension through Geneva's twilight streets, I felt a profound shift in my circumstances. I was no longer alone in my quest for justice. For the first time since Michael's betrayal, I had allies, people who valued not just what I knew about Blackwood's operations, but who I was as a professional and a person. The path ahead remained treacherous, but I no longer had to walk it in isolation. With Penelope's team behind me, I could transform from victim to victor, not just reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but bringing to justice everyone who had participated in corrupting Stuart Blackwood's legacy. In abandoning me, Michael had unknowingly set in motion his own undoing. He'd expected me to remain the dependent wife he'd cultivated over a decade of subtle manipulation. Instead, he'd created his most dangerous adversary. For 2 weeks, I lived in a world of financial forensics and strategic planning within Halcyon's Geneva headquarters. Days began at dawn and stretched well into the night, my mind once again alive with the analytical challenges I'd abandoned for a decade of corporate wifedom. You've lost none of your edge, Penelope remarked on our 5th consecutive 14-hour day. If anything, you've gained perspective that makes your analysis more insightful. My temporary workstation in Halcyon's secure room had become a war room of sorts. Digital screens displayed complex financial flows. Whiteboards mapped Blackwood's corporate structure with red markers highlighting vulnerabilities. A timeline tracked Michael's gradual transformation of the company from Stuart's legitimate security firm into a sophisticated money laundering operation. The pattern began 3 months after Stuart's death, I explained to the team, pointing to the first suspicious transactions. Michael waited just long enough to consolidate control, then began with small test operations through the Singapore office. Classic approach, Maurice agreed, manipulating the digital display to highlight the pattern. Start small, ensure the channels work, then gradually increase volume once confidence builds. The work was exhausting, but exhilarating. For the first time since Michael's betrayal, I felt fully engaged with my own capabilities, rather than drowning in emotional aftermath. Each discovery, each connection mapped between shell companies and legitimate operations, brought me closer to not just understanding what Michael had built, but how to dismantle it. On day 9, the first significant challenge emerged. Amber rushed into our conference room, her typically composed demeanor visibly disturbed. "There's been a security breach at your hotel," she announced without preamble. "Someone accessed your room while you were here." My blood ran cold. "How? Do you know?" "We've had discreet surveillance on your pension since you engaged our services," Claude explained calmly. "Standard protocol for high-risk clients." The implications were chilling. Either Michael had somehow tracked me to Geneva, or someone connected to Blackwood's illicit operations had identified me as a threat. "Did they take anything?" I asked, mentally cataloging the few possessions in my room. "Nothing appears missing," Amber replied. "But your laptop was accessed. The surveillance team observed a man in maintenance uniform entering with a key, spending approximately 12 minutes inside, then departing. Morris immediately took my backup drive to his forensics lab. Within hours, he confirmed the worst. They installed sophisticated tracking software, he reported grimly. Had you connected to any Blackwood systems after returning to your room, it would have mapped your activities and reported back to whoever placed it. Can you trace who's behind it? The programming signature suggests Israeli-developed commercial spyware, the kind Blackwood occasionally deploys for corporate clients. But attribution is difficult. The intrusion forced us to accelerate our timeline. I could no longer stay in Geneva safely, and any further research needed higher security protocols. We moved to Phase 2 immediately, Penelope decided. Claude, arrange secure transport to London. Maurice, sanitize all our systems of references to Anya's presence here. London? I questioned. Why not return directly to New York? Because, Penelope explained patiently, we need to establish your legal position before Michael realizes what you're doing. London is home to Halcyon's legal team that specializes in corporate governance issues across international jurisdictions. Within hours, I was on a private charter to London arranged through Halcyon's security protocols, leaving no commercial travel record. My few possessions remained in Geneva as a decoy. Morris had cleansed my devices and provided a new secure laptop with advanced encryption. The London rain greeted me at a private airfield outside the city, where a nondescript car waited to transport me to a secure apartment in Kensington, maintained by Halcyon for high-profile clients. Welcome to your new command center, my driver announced as we entered an elegant townhouse. The team is already assembled upstairs. In the apartment's dining room, converted to a conference space, I met the next group of allies in my campaign, barristers, specializing in international corporate law, forensic accountants who had previously worked for regulatory agencies, and a distinguished silver-haired gentleman introduced simply as Mr. Preston. Mr. Preston advises several regulatory bodies on complex financial crimes, Penelope explained. His involvement must remain strictly confidential. The gravitas with which she made this introduction suggested Mr. Preston was far more influential than his understated appearance would indicate. Mrs. Blackwood, he acknowledged with a slight nod, your evidence against Blackwood Securities operations is compelling. However, moving against an organization of this sophistication requires precise choreography. I understand, I replied. But time is against us. Someone already knows I'm gathering evidence. All the more reason to proceed methodically, he countered. A miscalculation now could not only undermine your legal position, but potentially put you in physical danger. Over the next 3 days, we constructed what Mr. Preston called the architecture of reclamation, a multi-pronged strategy combining corporate governance, regulatory intervention, and strategic leverage. The first test of this strategy came unexpectedly on day 3 in London. My secure phone, a device only 5 people had the number for, rang at 2:17 a.m. Anya, it's Chester Wong from Singapore, came the urgent voice when I answered. You need to know. Security teams conducted a raid on my department today. They seized servers and questioned everyone about unauthorized access. My stomach dropped. Were you implicated? Not directly. I covered our tracks well. But Michael himself is in Singapore now, leading the investigation. He knows someone accessed the backup systems. What about your safety, Chester? I've already tendered my resignation citing family reasons. By the time they realize I helped, I'll be back in Hong Kong with my parents. His voice lowered. But there's more. They're watching all your known associates. Your sister Trixie reported someone following her in Boston. The news sent ice through my veins. Involving Trixie had been my first move. Necessary but now clearly dangerous for her. Tell me she's safe. She is. Harold Jenkins arranged private security for her 2 days ago. But Michael is systematically investigating everyone connected. To you. It's only a matter of time before he traces your movements. After relaying this information to Penelope, our timeline compressed further. The emergency board meeting Harold had called was only 4 days away, and Michael now knew someone was moving against him. We need to be in New York immediately. I insisted. Mr. Preston disagreed. Arriving just before the meeting maximizes tactical advantage. Michael will have minimal time to counter your evidence or prepare legal obstacles. The debate continued until Penelope intervened. Both perspectives have merit, she observed, which is why we implement a split strategy. Preston's team continues. The legal groundwork here while you return to New York, not openly, but through channels Michael won't monitor. What channels? I asked. Penelope's smile held a hint of satisfaction. The very networks you've been mapping. The weak points in Blackwood's operation aren't just vulnerabilities. They're access routes. We'll move you through their blind spots. The irony was perfect. I would return to New York using the same hidden pathways Michael had created for moving. Illicit funds. Channels designed to be invisible to normal monitoring systems, including his own. 24 hours later, I boarded a cargo flight to Canada as an administrative assistant to a renewable energy consultant, complete with appropriate documentation courtesy of Halcyon's resources. From there, I would cross into the United States by land, a method Blackwood's security monitoring would never anticipate for someone of my previous status. As the cargo plane rumbled into the night sky, I reviewed the encrypted files containing everything I'd need for the coming confrontation. The evidence was irrefutable, the legal strategy sound, the regulatory authorities quietly alerted. In just 3 days, I would face Michael across the Blackwood security boardroom table, a meeting he didn't yet know I would attend. The wife he'd abandoned in Dubai with nothing would return as his company's potential destroyer or savior, depending entirely on his response to my terms. The turbulence of the cargo plane seemed fitting, physical manifestation of the disruption I was about to unleash. The first true test of my transformation from corporate wife to corporate avenger was about to begin. Michael had taught me an unintended lesson in Dubai. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you truly are. Now I would teach him one in return. Never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. New York City appeared through the taxi window like a dream from another life, familiar yet strangely distant. 3 weeks had passed since Michael abandoned me in Dubai, though it felt like years. The sleek glass towers of Manhattan no longer impressed me with their grandeur. I now saw them as I saw the Burj Al Arab, beautiful facades potentially concealing ugly truths. We crossed the Brooklyn Bridge at dawn, the city's skyline gilded by early morning light. My driver, arranged through Halcyon's network, maintained professional silence as he navigated toward Brooklyn Heights. My temporary residence wasn't the Tribeca penthouse Michael and I had shared, but a modest brownstone apartment belonging to a Halcyon associate currently working overseas. "We're here, ma'am," the driver announced, pulling up to an unassuming building on a tree-lined street. "As instructed, no one knows you've returned to New York except the core team." I thanked him and carried my single suitcase up the steps. The apartment was small but comfortable. Functional furniture, well-stocked kitchen, and most importantly, a secure fiber connection already configured to Halcyon's encrypted network. Within minutes of arrival, I'd established my command center. On the dining room table, connecting with Penelope's team in London. "Position established," I confirmed through our secure channel. "What's our status?" "Harold has confirmed the board meeting remains scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m., Penelope replied. "Michael returned from Singapore yesterday and has been in closed-door meetings with Alvin and Carter since his arrival. He suspects something significant then. Undoubtedly, but he can't know the full extent. Our sources indicate he believes this is about the Singapore server breach, not a comprehensive move against his leadership." I spent the day reviewing our strategy one final time, preparing for every possible countermove Michael might attempt. The evidence was organized, the legal structures verified, the regulatory notifications in place. Yet anxiety gnawed at me, not fear of failure, but the surreal nature of confronting the man who had been my husband, partner, and ultimately betrayer. That evening, Standing before the bathroom mirror, I confronted my reflection with clear eyes. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the polished corporate wife who had boarded a plane to Dubai weeks earlier. My hair, once maintained with expensive treatments, now hung in a simple, practical cut I'd received in Geneva. The designer clothes had been replaced with a streamlined wardrobe chosen for function rather than status. Even my posture had changed. Shoulders straighter, chin higher, eyes sharper. The external transformation reflected a deeper internal shift. I was no longer Anya Blackwood, decorative accessory to Michael's success. I had reclaimed Anya Reeves, the financial analyst with a gift for uncovering hidden patterns and structural weaknesses. More than that, I had become someone new entirely, a hybrid creature forged in betrayal and tempered through strategic response. The night before the confrontation, I performed one final ritual of transformation. From my suitcase, I removed the last physical connection to my old identity, my passport issued in the name Anya Blackwood. While my emergency passport had been necessary for travel, I'd applied for an expedited replacement in Geneva under my original legal name, Anya Reeves Blackwood. This hyphenated version had been my legal name since marriage, though Michael had discouraged its use, claiming it was cumbersome for social occasions. Now I understood his subtle erasure for what it was, another method of removing my independent identity. I placed both documents side by side on the kitchen counter. The difference was symbolic but profound. Tomorrow I would enter Blackwood headquarters, not as Michael's discarded wife, but as an original founder with legal standing and irrefutable evidence of corporate crimes. Sleep eluded me that night. Instead, I rehearsed scenarios, anticipated Michael's likely tactics, and reviewed the evidence, one final time. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute, my mind sharp with purpose as I dressed in a charcoal gray suit purchased in London. Professional, understated, and utterly unlike the designer labels Michael had insisted I wear. Remember, Penelope had advised during our final briefing, your greatest advantage is his underestimation of you. He abandoned you because he believed you were powerless without him. That belief is his vulnerability. At precisely 1:15 p.m., I arrived at an unremarkable coffee shop 3 blocks from Blackwood headquarters in Midtown. Harold Jenkins was already waiting, his distinguished appearance somehow both conspicuous and forgettable in the busy cafe. "Anya," he greeted me with gentle formality, rising as I approached. "You look remarkably well, considering the circumstances." "Circumstances have a way of revealing what matters," I replied, accepting his offered handshake. "Is everything prepared?" Harold nodded, sliding a leather portfolio across the table. "The board is assembled. Michael has been unusually tense, demanding complete loyalty pledges from executives, investigating security breaches. He knows something is happening but can't identify the threat." "And the documents?" "All verified. Stewart's shares combined with your ownership constitute controlling interest." Harold's expression softened. "Stewart would be proud of what you're doing. He always said Michael needed balance, someone to temper his brilliance with ethics. He thought that person was you." The mention of my late father-in-law brought unexpected emotion. Stewart had welcomed me into the Blackwood family with genuine warmth, treating me as an intellectual equal rather than merely his son's wife. His inclusion of my name on the founding documents hadn't been merely sentimental, it had been prescient. "It's time," Harold said, checking his watch. "The car is waiting." The sleek black town car delivered us to Blackwood headquarters, a 20-story glass tower in Midtown, with the company's distinctive logo emblazoned across the entrance. Security guards recognized Harold immediately, but looked at me with confusion. "Mrs. Blackwood?" one asked hesitantly. "We weren't informed you would be visiting today." "Ms. Reeves Blackwood," I corrected gently. "I'm here for the board meeting." Their uncertainty was palpable as they consulted their tablets. Harold intervened smoothly. "Ms. Reeves Blackwood is an original company founder and board member," he explained, presenting documentation. Her clearance is perpetual under Article 7 of the Corporate Charter. After a brief, tense verification, we were allowed through security. As we rode the elevator to the executive floor, Harold squeezed my hand briefly. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "you've already won by taking back your power." The boardroom doors loomed before us, heavy mahogany panels that had always represented the inner sanctum of Michael's dominion. Beyond them waited not just Michael, but the culmination of my transformation. The security guard stationed outside recognized Harold and nodded respectfully, then looked at me with that same confusion I'd encountered downstairs. "It's all right, Thomas," Harold said. "Ms. Reeves-Blackwood has full board clearance." Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward as the guard opened the door. The conversation inside ceased abruptly as I entered. 8 people sat around the massive conference table, company executives, legal counsel, and at the head, Michael himself. His expression shifted from irritation at the interruption to utter shock as he recognized me. For a single, satisfying moment, the polished entrepreneur was rendered completely speechless, his composure shattered by my impossible presence. "Hello, Michael," I said, my voice steady and clear in the stunned silence. "I believe this meeting concerns the future of Blackwood Security. As a founding owner with 30% equity stake, I'll be participating in those discussions." I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, placing my portfolio precisely before me. The woman who had been abandoned in Dubai with nothing now sat as an equal, no, a superior, to the man who had discarded her. "Now," I continued into the shocked silence, "shall we begin?" The Blackwood Security boardroom remained frozen in shock. Michael recovered first, his initial surprise transforming into calculated charm, the same facade he'd deployed throughout our marriage whenever faced with unexpected challenges. "Anya," he said smoothly, rising from his chair, "this is certainly a surprise. We were all concerned after that unfortunate situation in Dubai. I'm relieved to see you've made it home safely." "Spare me the performance, Michael," I replied, my voice steady. "We both know exactly what happened in Dubai. The question is whether everyone else at this table understands what's been happening with Blackwood Security under your leadership." I opened my portfolio, removing the first document, a comprehensive analysis of Blackwood's money laundering operations, and slid it to Harold, who began distributing copies around the table. Michael's feigned composure fractured as he glimpsed the contents. "This meeting is adjourned," he announced sharply. "We have a private family matter to discuss." "On the contrary," Harold interjected, "this meeting was called specifically to address governance concerns. As the executor of Stuart Blackwood's estate and representative of his 25% ownership stake, I insist we proceed." The next hour transformed the room's dynamics completely. As evidence was presented, alliances shifted visibly. Several board members, particularly those who had known Stuart, moved physically away from Michael's end of the table. Alvin and Carter remained loyally at his side, their faces hardening as their complicity was exposed. "These allegations are absurd," Alvin declared. "This is clearly an attempt by Mrs. Blackwood to extract revenge for personal grievances." "Ms. Reeves-Blackwood," I corrected him firmly. "And the Singapore server logs confirming your direct involvement suggest otherwise, Alvin." By meeting's end, the board had split into clear factions, those aligned with Michael and his co-conspirators, those supporting my effort to reclaim and rehabilitate the company, and those cautiously neutral, awaiting the outcome before committing. Michael cornered me as the room emptied, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea what you've started, Anya. There are people involved in these operations who won't hesitate to make me disappear?" I finished for him. "Like you threatened in Dubai? You should know that complete documentation of Blackwood's operations has been secured with multiple legal entities. Anything happens to me, it all becomes public immediately." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in Michael's eyes. Not for me, but for himself. He had never truly seen me until this moment, never recognized the strength and intelligence he'd systematically undermined for years. As I left Blackwood headquarters that afternoon, I wasn't just walking away from a successful board confrontation. I was walking toward a new community of allies committed to restoring Stuart's legacy. Harold, Penelope's team, Chester from Singapore, board members who had voted to suspend Michael pending investigation, and most importantly, my own reclaimed identity as Anya Reeves Blackwood, corporate strategist and reformer. My transformation was no longer just personal. It had become the nucleus of a movement to reclaim Blackwood security itself. The victory at the board meeting proved to be just the beginning of a brutal struggle for Blackwood Security's future. Within 48 hours of Michael's suspension, the real counterattack began, not through corporate channels, but through more personal and devastating means. I was reviewing forensic accounting reports in my Brooklyn Heights apartment when the call came from Trixie. "Someone broke into my house," she said, voice trembling. "They didn't take anything valuable, just my laptop and the file box you asked me to secure." Hours later, Harold reported similar intrusions at his home office. The pattern was clear. Michael was systematically eliminating copies of the evidence against him, while the security team I'd hired through Halcyon reported increasing surveillance of my movements. The most devastating blow came 3 days after the board meeting. Penelope called from Geneva, her typically composed voice tight with concern. "Maurice has been arrested in Singapore," she reported. "Local authorities are charging him with cybercrime violations related to the Blackwood server access. His bail has been denied." The message was unmistakable. Michael might be suspended from company operations, but his international connections remained powerful. He was demonstrating that anyone who helped me would face consequences. That night, alone in my borrowed apartment, doubt crept in for the eye. First time since Dubai. The confidence that had carried me through Singapore and Geneva wavered as I confronted the collateral damage my quest for justice was creating. Maurice's freedom, Trixie's safety, Harold's reputation, all were now compromised. Because they had allied themselves with me. "Perhaps you should consider a settlement," Harold suggested gently during our emergency meeting the following morning. "Michael has offered to resign quietly with generous compensation if you drop all investigations and evidence." The old Anya might have accepted this compromise, the path of least resistance, avoiding further conflict. But the woman I had become recognized the manipulation behind the offer. "If we stop now, everyone who helped me remains vulnerable," I replied, my resolve hardening rather than weakening under pressure. "Maurice stays in prison. The money laundering continues under new management, and Michael escapes accountability completely." That night marked my darkest moment, but also the turning point. Instead of retreating, I decided to accelerate. If Michael wanted war, I would give him total warfare, deploying every resource and connection I'd established. By dawn, I had developed a new strategy that would transform this personal battle into something Michael couldn't fight alone, something bigger than both of us. Something that would not just reclaim Blackwood security, but fundamentally reform it. The company Stuart Blackwood had built would not merely survive this crisis. It would emerge transformed, with me at its helm, not as Michael's replacement, but as something entirely new. The third morning after the board confrontation, an unexpected message arrived from a ghost of my former life. My secure phone, the number known only to my closest allies, displayed a Manhattan area code I didn't recognize. "Ms. Reeves Blackwood," a formal voice greeted me. "This is Carter McNeil from Blackwood Security. I'd like to meet privately to discuss matters of mutual interest." Carter, Michael's loyal lieutenant and accomplice in Dubai. The man who had helped orchestrate my abandonment now sought a private meeting. Every instinct warned of a trap, yet strategic curiosity prevailed. "Why would I agree to that?" I asked coolly. Because I have information about Michael's contingency plans that you need to hear. And because I've realized I'm on the wrong side of history in this conflict. We arranged to meet at the New York Public Library. Public enough for safety, quiet, enough for discretion. I arrived with 2 of Halcyon's security personnel positioned nearby, taking no chances with Carter's sudden change of heart. He looked diminished somehow, his once impeccable appearance now showing signs of strain, wrinkled shirt, shadowed eyes, nervous gestures. When he spotted me, his expression registered something I'd never seen from him before. Respect. "Thank you for coming," he began, sliding a flash drive across the table. This contains Michael's personal files on what he calls Operation Cleanup. It details how he plans to disappear with approximately $40 million in company funds while leaving you and Harold to face the regulatory investigations. "Why are you giving me this?" I studied his face for deception. "Because Michael made the same mistake with me that he made with you," Carter replied, a bitter edge to his voice. He assumed complete loyalty while planning to sacrifice me if necessary. The execution orders for cleanup include eliminating all witnesses, including me. The flash drive contained exactly what Carter had promised, evidence that Michael was preparing to flee the country with laundered assets while deploying elaborate legal mechanisms to implicate others in his schemes. Most valuable was proof that Michael had secretly purchased a controlling interest in the penthouse apartment we had shared, the home I'd believed was in his name for tax purposes. Documents revealed he had used company funds, disguised through shell companies, to pay for what was legally marital property. "He never intended to share anything with you," Carter explained. "The prenuptial agreement you signed contained clauses that would be triggered if he ever faced legal scrutiny. The apartment, the art collection, even your jewelry, all would be protected as company assets, not personal property." Carter's betrayal of Michael wasn't driven by newfound ethics, but by self-preservation. Yet his defection represented something significant, the beginning of Michael's empire collapsing. From within. "What do you want in exchange?" I asked directly. "Immunity from prosecution, a clean exit, and—" He hesitated. "Acknowledgement that I helped stop something that grew far beyond what any of us originally intended." As Carter left, I realized this message from my past wasn't just about evidence or strategy. It was confirmation that the world I'd inhabited as Michael Blackwood's wife had been entirely illusory, a carefully constructed facade where nothing, not even our home, had truly belonged to me. The revelation didn't bring pain as it once might have. Instead, it crystallized my resolve to build something authentic from the ashes of Michael's deception. The final confrontation with Michael unfolded not in a corporate boardroom, but in the penthouse we had once shared, the luxury residence I had decorated with painstaking care during happier times, believing it represented our shared success. I arrived precisely at noon, entering with the key I still possessed. The security staff, confused by recent events but aware of my ownership claims, allowed me passage after verifying my identification. The elevator ascended silently to the top floor, each passing moment heightening my awareness of the profound shift about to occur. The apartment looked exactly as I remembered: Italian marble floors, custom furnishings, the expansive windows showcasing Manhattan's skyline. Only one element had changed. Michael stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection fragmented across the glass, much like his crumbling empire. "Breaking and entering now, Anya?" he asked without turning, attempting nonchalance though tension radiated from his posture. "One cannot break into what one legally owns," I replied, placing the property documents Carter had provided on the kitchen counter. The penthouse purchase was completed with marital assets funneled through company accounts. That makes it joint property, regardless of whose name appears on the deed. Michael turned finally, his practiced charm nowhere in evidence. Instead, raw fury and fear battled across his features, the mask of successful entrepreneur completely fallen away. "You've systematically destroyed everything I built," he said, voice dangerously low. Correction. Everything we built, I countered calmly. And you destroyed it yourself when you turned Stewart's legitimate company into a money laundering operation. For nearly an hour, we circled each other verbally, Michael alternating between threats, attempting to re-establish psychological control, and eventually, desperate bargaining. We could still salvage something, he offered, a shadow of his former confidence. I have offshore resources even your forensic team hasn't discovered. We could disappear, start over somewhere new. The suggestion was almost laughable. This man who had abandoned me penniless in Dubai now proposed we flee together. Not from love or loyalty, but because I had proven more valuable as an ally than an enemy. I'm not here to negotiate, Michael. I'm here to inform you of decisions already made. I removed the final document from my portfolio, the comprehensive settlement that Penelope's legal team had prepared. You have two options. Sign this agreement transferring all your Blackwood shares to me and cooperating fully with authorities, in exchange for consideration during sentencing, or face prosecution without any protections whatsoever. Michael scanned the document, his expression shifting from disbelief to comprehension of his complete defeat. You planned this from the moment I left you in Dubai, he said, not a question but a realization. No, Michael. You planned this the moment you decided I was dispensable. I placed a pen beside the document. The difference is, I executed my response better than you predicted. His signature, when it finally came, was a broken version of the confident flourish I'd watched on. Countless documents throughout our marriage. With that single stroke, ownership of Blackwood security, and the penthouse we stood in, transferred completely to me. As he gathered the few personal items the agreement permitted him to take, Michael paused at the door for one final attempt to reassert control. You won't succeed, he said simply. The business relationships that made Blackwood valuable require compromises you're not prepared to make. I met his gaze steadily. That was always your fundamental misunderstanding, Michael. You saw Blackwood as valuable despite its corruption. I see it as valuable because of what it can become once that corruption is removed. When the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the penthouse that now legally belonged solely to me. The view remained spectacular, the furnishings still luxurious, but the space felt different, cleansed of a presence that had gradually poisoned everything it touched. Tomorrow would bring the challenges of rebuilding Blackwood security, of transforming a compromised company into something worthy of Stewart's original vision. But today, in this moment, I allowed myself to fully absorb what had been accomplished. The woman abandoned in Dubai with nothing now stood victorious, having reclaimed not just material assets, but something far more valuable, her own power. Chiwa, transformation of Blackwood security began the morning after Michael's departure. The building that had once represented his singular vision now hummed with a different energy as I walked through the lobby, nodding to security staff who regarded me with newfound respect. Good morning, Ms. Reeves Blackwood, the receptionist greeted me, the name change already implemented throughout company systems. Harold waited in what had been Michael's office, now temporarily mine until the renovation plans were completed. The space still carried too many reminders of its previous occupant: dark woods, masculine leather, and imposing art selected to intimidate rather than inspire. The regulatory officials will arrive at 10, Harold informed me, placing a stack of documents on the desk. They're impressed with our proactive cooperation. The prosecutor believes we can salvage the company's reputation if we continue this transparent approach. And Maurice's situation? I asked, the wrongful imprisonment of Penelope's digital forensics expert remaining my most urgent concern. Singapore authorities received our documentation this morning. His release is being processed as we speak. Harold smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Penelope sends her congratulations, by the way. She's arriving next week to discuss implementing comprehensive compliance systems. The following weeks blurred into a carefully orchestrated dance of legal negotiations, corporate restructuring, and public relations management. With Carter's cooperation as a key witness, authorities were able to isolate the criminal elements within Blackwood's operations while preserving its legitimate security business. Michael and Alvin faced multiple federal charges, while lower-level employees involved in the money laundering were offered varying degrees of leniency in exchange for cooperation. 3 months after the confrontation, I stood in the newly redesigned headquarters, watching workers install the rebranded company logo. No longer Blackwood Security, the firm now operated as Reeves Integrity Systems, a name simultaneously honoring my reclaimed identity and signaling our new operational philosophy. The penthouse underwent a similar transformation. I donated most of the furnishings Michael had selected, replacing them with pieces that reflected my own aesthetic rather than the ostentatious luxury he had preferred. The space that had once felt like a gilded cage became a sanctuary, my own domain rather than an extension of someone else's ego. On the anniversary of my abandonment in Dubai, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Trixie flew in from Boston, Harold brought his wife, Penelope attended with several Halcyon colleagues who had become friends, and even Chester made the journey from Hong Kong, where he now headed my company's Asia-Pacific division. As we shared a meal around my dining table, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The woman who had once defined herself primarily as Michael Blackwood's wife had disappeared completely, replaced by someone I was still getting to know, a leader, strategist, and reformer who had not only survived betrayal, but transformed it into unprecedented growth. A toast, Harold proposed, raising his glass. To Anya, who reminded us all that true security comes not from wealth or power, but from knowing exactly who you are. As our glasses clinked together, I felt the final pieces of my new identity lock into place. The past no longer defined me. The future stretched ahead with possibilities I was only beginning to explore. Michael had abandoned me in a foreign country with nothing, believing it would destroy me. Instead, it had revealed a strength I hadn't known I possessed, the resilience, to rebuild not just a company or an apartment, but an entire self. And that ultimately was the most valuable ownership of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.